There's a new beat in town. Welcome to Bullet and Flight Music Store, your premier spot for music, books, and one-of-a-kind novelties. Looking to treat yourself or find a unique gift for the music lover in your life? We make it easy. In fact, you can start your collection today for as low as 44 cents. That's right, world-class finds for less than a cup of coffee. Visit us online at bulletinflightmusic.myshopify.com. Plus, keep the conversation going 24/7 with Bullet in Flight Radio on Podbean. Bullet in Flight. Find your rhythm, find your soul.
To keep the faith and trust, knowing that you're more than conquerors because you believe me.
Believe in yourself, believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself, believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself, believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself, believe in me. Know that I am. Folks always got something to say, love to criticize you in every way. Instead of taking what's wrong out of their own eyes, they rather whisper and make fun than deny. Believe in yourself, believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself, believe her. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself, believe her. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself, believe her. Believe in me. Know that I am.
This song is all about belief and believing in oneself. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself, for you are a new creature God created.
They spread little rumors, tell lies, little foxes destroy the vine. You feel so shaked up, you wanna wake up, so stay on your knees. I'm begging you, please forget your enemies. What's down in the dark will see the light. It will be alright. Believe in me, believe in yourself. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in me. Yeah. Yeah. Believer. Believe in yourself. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in me. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, believer, believe in me.
Great day, everyone. This is Bishop Bonnie L. Radden, and you are listening to Inside Out, a weekly broadcast about our mental and emotional well-being.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Gioni Lewis. I'm an associate professor of counseling psychology at the University of Maryland, College Park. And as Terrell said, for the last year, I've worked with this amazing team putting on this webinar series. We're really excited for our final session today. So today's webinar will feature Doctors Hector Adames, Evan Auguste, and Krista Edwards. And we will explore, and they'll all be sharing about clinical practice through a critical psychology lens and really centering the experiences and needs of marginalized communities of color. So first, Dr. Adames will discuss ways to respond to the rise in hate crimes and racial tensions by emphasizing psychology's responsibility to recognize and treat racial trauma. The next, drawing on 3 schools of Black psychology, Dr. Auguste will address the importance of Black radical psychology in disrupting institutional complacency and ways to advocate for liberatory practices rooted in the Black radical tradition. And then finally, Dr. Edwards will discuss the psychological effects of racism, including how microaggressions contribute to mental health challenges. So next, I will read the bios for our speakers. And so I'm just going to read all 3 bios, and then I'll pass it over to our first speaker. So our first speaker, Dr. Hector Adames, received his doctorate in clinical psychology from the APA accredited program at Wright State University in Ohio. He completed his APA predoctoral internship and postdoctoral fellowship at Boston University School of Medicine. By training, he is a neuropsychologist and currently a full professor in the College of Professional Psychology at the Chicago School, where he co-founded and co-directs the IC Race Lab, Immigration, Critical Race, and Cultural Equity Lab. Among his many publications, some of which I've collaborated with him as a part of the Psychology of Radical Healing Collective, he's also co-authored and co-edited 7 books. He's co-developed several therapeutic frameworks for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, including the Healing Ethno and Racial Trauma, the HEART framework, the Keeping Radical Healing in Mind therapeutic approach, and an intersectional identity model for queer people of color titled Reclaiming All of Me, the Racial Queer Identity Framework. Among other awards, he was honored in 2021 with the Presidential Citation from the American Psychological Association. Next, we'll have Dr. Evan Auguste, Assistant Professor of Psychology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. He completed his PhD in clinical psychology with a major area of focus in forensic psychology at Fordham University in 2022. He identifies as a Haitian American man who has informed his work on examining the U.S.'s history of anti-Blackness, and which has shaped psychological realities both in and outside the country's borders. He is the director of the ASILI Collective, a research group whose work focuses broadly on addressing mental health consequences of structural anti-Blackness through a Black liberation psychology lens. This advocacy involves connecting local, national, and international coalitions to promote policy, radical movement, and community change. He is also currently the chair for the Sawubona Healing Circle program, which is a part of the Association of Black Psychologists. And he's on the board for the Institute for the Development of Human Arts and the leadership team for In Cultured Company. Lastly, we have Dr. Krista Edwards. Dr. Krista Edwards has a doctorate in school psychology and is a practicing school psychologist, published author, and co-founder of the Black School Psychologists Network, which is an important network for Black school psychologists. As an identity-specific psychologist, she works with African, Black, and Caribbean students who might be struggling with mental health issues in schools. Her research interests are rooted in decolonizing school psychology and exploring strength-based, culturally responsive ways to mitigate race-related stress for youth. Her work extends to students, families, and school administration, and her goals are to curate spaces for healing, learning, and liberation. So we have 3 amazing speakers coming up. And next, if we can all give a clap and warm welcome to Dr. Hector Adames.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lewis. I'm going to share my screen real quick. And you should all be able to see that, right? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you to the committee for your kind and generous invitation for me to share some of my work, some of my thinking, and some of my heart, as well as some of my art with you all. I'm going to be talking about the importance of healing through truth-telling and calling a thing and not being afraid by what's going on and the different ways that the government is trying to muzzle us, that it's really important for us to call a thing, call and talk the truth. And we need to also do that in psychology. And we do that by many different ways. But one way that I do it is by naming racism within the field and racism in clinical practice. As I thought about how I wanted to start my story with you all, I wanted to highlight, for those of us who are on the social media streets, that there's this trend going around. And the trend that's taken over is folks are comparing, posting pictures, what was life like 10 years ago in 2016. And I want you all to imagine, where were you in 2016? Where were you in life? What were you doing? What were you interested in, right? To remind some of us what was going on during this time, Pokemon was really big. TikTok and Snapchat were really big. Twitter was still a decent place to be at, right? And all that good stuff. So the other piece that was also happening in 2016 was the introduction of the language of fake news. And this is something that I'm not seeing in the trend that I'm seeing on TikTok, right, about 2016. And people have talked about fake news in so many different ways. They've talked about fake news as alternative facts. They've talked about it as mistruths, falsehoods, inaccuracies, and myths. I like to call them lies. Very simple, parsimonious lies. So fake news are lies, right? And this was all introduced in 2016 in theory. And what scholars, especially in the political science area, have talked about, that we're in this post-truth era. And they describe post-truth as a situation whereby facts have lost their currency in the contemporary public discourse, right? And this concept, this idea, this notion of post-truth is really not intended to imply that truth doesn't exist, but instead there's some nuance. And the nuance is that facts have become less important. What was also taking place during this post-truth birth, the way people kind of talk about it, is that it was really much popularized in 2016. So what else was taking place in 2016? Well, if you recall, it was the big Brexit. So this is when the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. And here in the United States, it was the election of the 4-time indicted, twice impeached, insurrection inciter, and now convicted felon Donald J. Trump. However, post-truth era is not new, even though a lot of folks write about it, that it started in 2016. In my thinking about post-truth, it's always been around, right? It's always been around since this country was founded. And the purpose of this post-truth is really to silence the impact of oppression, the impact of racism, and the impact of dehumanization on the lives of people. It tends to blame the victim, erode people's sense of hope and agency, maintain and strengthen the culture of white supremacy, which is the foundation of the United States, and to maintain and abuse power and control, right? So post-truth and its purpose has been around since the beginning of the United States. When it comes to racism, we really see racism and post-truth go hand in hand. Historically, there's been moments when books have been banned. We're, again, living through one of those moments right now. There's been banning of ethnic studies, and of course, the criminalization of racial justice movements. All things that we see and that we're all currently living, and again, waves of events that have happened in the past in the country. It's by no surprise that this is also happening during a time when we as a society, we're becoming more Black and brown, right? 42% of the current population of the United States identify as people of color. So all these post-truths and its purpose, right, and the fact that it came around again in 2016 and we're still living through it, it's all by design. It's all serving that purpose that I just described. And one of its purpose is to have us fear for our lives, have us live in a state of fear, of anxiety, of dehumanization. And we see this through the various killings that have happened throughout the past 10 years. So for example, in Oklahoma, we saw that a 5th grader draws a swastika and writes white power on his hand, right? This post-truth is really impacting our society broadly. We see this also in Minnesota. A middle school student tells a Latinx child that his mother should go to jail with all quote unquote illegal immigrants. We also see this here in the state of Illinois where I live at the fatal shooting of Sonia Massey. And she was just home and she actually called 911 to ask for help, and she was actually killed in her own house. In Massachusetts, right, a 10-year-old Muslim girl gets a note saying, "You're a terrorist, I will kill you." And in New York City, a middle school child writes in a textbook that he will lynch the Black husband of his white teacher. And I could go on and on and on, and we could spend the rest of the webinar coming up with different examples of how this post-truth era and its purpose, right, how that ripple effect, that is the ripple effect that it's having on our communities throughout the country. More recently, we are living during an era where ICE is being is killing people. It's tormenting communities, right? And the one that received the most the most news and the most buzz in the news was Renee Nicole Good, right? Which was a white woman that was killed by ICE a few weeks ago. But it's really important to know that she, unfortunately, was not the first person killed by ICE. In 2025, other folks, right, have been killed by ICE. And predominantly, there were Black and brown and Asian brothers and sisters and siblings that were killed by ICE. And Renee's life is and was important, and so are all these other folks that we don't know their name, like Isidro and Shiraz and Jane and Oscar and Nenko and Leo and Juan and Carlos and Santos and Delvin. We're only 22, 23 days into 2026, and the murders continue, right? So far, when I did my search yesterday, I was able to find 2 folks in 2026 that have been killed by ICE, Renee Nicole and Keith, right? So as the Black feminist praxis reminds us, it's really important for us to say the names of folks that are killed, murdered, and so that we don't forget them. So it's really important to say their names. And of course, I cannot do this talk and stay true to my values if I didn't bring in baby Liam. And this just happened this week on Tuesday. So ICE federal officers actually detained Liam and his dad in Minnesota. He's 5 years old. And he was used as bait, according to the school officials, to catch, quote unquote, catch other folks that ICE were after. What I want to say to Liam is that wherever you are, I hope your ancestors are protecting you. I hope your parents taught you the importance of seeking a higher power, and I hope you're holding on to your strength. And I hope this nightmare is over soon for you. And the story of Liam is not, again, unfortunately, unique. The story of Liam is connected to the story of Hind Rajab, the Palestinian from Gaza, little girl that was killed. It's also connected to Tamir Rice, right? The Black boy in Cleveland that was playing and was also killed. So it's really important for us to kind of connect all these points, remember the history, and really pause and pay attention to what we are going through as a society, and the people and the communities that we serve, what are they experiencing? And for us to ask ourselves as folks in psychology, right, for us to ask ourselves, am I telling the truth? Am I telling it like it is? Are we telling the truth? Or are we colluding with this quote unquote post-truth era? So all of these horrific, dehumanizing examples, both recent and a little bit distant, is the heart of what racial trauma is. It's the face of racial trauma. And in our field, racial trauma has been discussed and written about and described in different ways. Back in the early 2000s, Lillian Comas-Diaz and Jacobson talked about ethnocultural allodynia. Others have talked about it as race-related trauma. Dr. Helms and Dr. Carter has talked about it as race-based traumatic stress. Dr. Tima and Dr. Ocampo have talked about it as racist incident-based trauma. Others have talked about it as race-based traumatic stress injury. Helms, again, talks about it also as ethno-violence trauma. And in my work with my colleague and students, Dr. Chavez and I, we've written about it in terms of ethno-racial trauma and also as racism-related stress and trauma. So I'm outlining these here because there's a rich, long history of folks in our field, right, who have been telling the truth, who have been describing and introducing and trying to understand what racial trauma is and its impact not only on individuals, but also on communities. The way I think about racial trauma is that it is the individual and collective psychological distress and fear of danger that results from experiencing or witnessing several things, including discrimination, threats of harm, violence, and intimidation. And that is specifically directed at people of color. And that this form of trauma comes from a legacy of oppressive laws, oppressive policies, and oppressive practices that stem from a culture of white supremacy. This form of trauma is pervasive and it's ongoing. It has no beginning, middle, and end. And when we think about all these different pieces, it's different than the ways in which we are socialized to think about trauma, which often has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So when we think about all these horrors, when we think about racism, it's really important to think that racism doesn't just take our power. And in addition to being a neuropsychologist, a professor, writer, I'm also an artist, and I love to write, and I have some poetry. So I'm going to do something a little bit different, and I'm going to share some of that. Racism doesn't just take our power. It teaches us to take it from ourselves, to dream small, to imagine only what they'll allow, to build within the limits they set, And here's the most dangerous part. Here's the most dangerous part. We start policing our own imaginations. We start shrinking our dreams before they could, shrinking to fit their framework. But we're done with that. We're unleashing what has been buried. We're building worlds, mundos, they've never imagined. And the reason why I'm sharing this piece with you all is as an invitation for us to think about how can we build worlds that are more humanizing, right? That are honoring people's dignity as a science, as a psychological science, as a practice, right? How can we build those worlds? And how can we think about building that world while we are addressing all the horrors that people of color are currently experiencing and racial trauma? And one way to do that is for us to build that world, is for us to really call a thing again, to tell the truth, right? That there's a lot of myths that I see on social media, that I see on some of the articles that I review and some of the work that's already published around racial trauma. So I'm going to quickly list them, and we could talk about some of these during the Q&A. So I have 7 myths, right, that are connected to that are out there about racial trauma or addressing racial trauma. And one of those myths is that history doesn't matter in our clinical work. That history doesn't matter, and that we should leave that to historians. We should leave that to folks who have degrees in other parts of the social science, but not so much in psychology. And I completely disagree with that, right? We need to know our history, not only our individual history, but our collective history, so that it doesn't repeat itself, so that we're able to understand what we need to do differently, right? And for us to understand what we're going through currently, right? I'm going to quote Dr. Helm, who says, history does not repeat itself. People make history repeat itself. So it's really important for us to kind of think about the importance of history in the training of the next generation of psychologists in our current work as practitioners, as scholars in the field. So again, the first myth is that history doesn't matter in our clinical work. The second myth is that we need to stay connected to only focusing on the individual, only understanding what's going on inside people's head, right? The old Cartesian philosophy that psychology has been rooted in. Well, I should say Western psychology has been rooted in, right? It's really dangerous when we're only focusing on the individual when we are addressing racial trauma. The third myth is this notion that we need to help people build resilience, and that should be the focus of our work when we're working with folks who are being impacted by or are experiencing racial trauma. What I like to say is that resilience is important, right? It's important. Resilience, if I was to explain it to, high schoolers who might not know the word, or elementary child, I would say resilience is when we become stronger in the broken places. Resilience is when we become stronger in the broken places. So life will break us, systems will break us, white supremacy will break us, or try to break us, right? Or at least try to crack us. And it's important for us to put those pieces back together, right? And that is what resilience is. However, it's myopic, and we need to move beyond resilience. So we also need to really think about how can we support people and communities to also nurture a stance of resistance. And that resistance could also be a form of healing for folks. And that resistance could look different for different people, right? It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go out there and be marching, right? If that works for you, that's great. But resilience could also mean I am not going to internalize the poison that a system of white supremacy wants me to inhale and take in, right? There are so many ways we could support people and communities to, of course, become stronger in the broken places, but also hold accountable and stop whoever is doing or whatever is doing the breaking. So that's the third myth, that treatment plan, that healing plan should only focus on people's resilience. The fourth myth is that racial representation is enough, and that's what we need to help people heal from racial trauma. And I would say that's not enough. Racial representation is important, but we also really need to understand where the practitioner is in his or her or their racial identity development. And I would say that that is even more important, in my opinion, and what the research shows, than just racial ethnic matching when we're providing care to people. So again, that's a myth that's out there. The fifth myth is that language doesn't matter when addressing racial trauma. And it does matter, right? Language is everything. Language is how we communicate. Language is how we explore. Language is how we try to share a subjectivity with someone else. And it's really important for us to be thoughtful and be intentional about the kind of language that we're using when we're talking about racism-related stress and trauma with our clients, when we ourselves are presenting on the topic, when we're talking with communities about the topic. So language is everything. The sixth myth is that a person's ascribed race leads to trauma. And for me, this is a big one. A lot of folks think that just because a person is a Black person or an Asian person or a person of color, that automatically that is what leads to trauma. And that's not accurate. What leads to trauma is white supremacy. What leads to racial trauma is a culture of white supremacy, is systemic racism, right? That's what leads to trauma. There's nothing wrong with people of color. There's nothing wrong about who we are, right? That there's nothing unique about us that we're vulnerable to the trauma. It's really the systems, the policies, the practices, right? That were set up in a way to intentionally harm, control, and have power over our bodies, our minds, and our existence. So a person's ascribed race does not lead to trauma. Racial trauma. And lastly, and this is another one that I'm seeing more and more and more, it's gaining a lot of roots, is the myth that racial trauma is the same as PTSD. And I know there's movements in the field for folks who want to add racial trauma to the next version of the DSM. And I think and believe deeply that that is dangerous. And in many ways, that is doing the work of white supremacy for us to include racial trauma as a DSM diagnosis for so many reasons. And it has so many implications. And one of the implications that I'm seeing, right, by folks who are saying that they're experts in this area, although even though they might not have the receipts to prove their expertise, is that then we need to medicate folks who are experiencing racial trauma. And I think that's very, very, very dangerous. But we could talk more about that during the Q&A. So again, this is a big myth that's out there, and it's really important for us to, I invite you to not collude with this thinking, and for us to really think about the implication of this. And as I'm closing, I want us to think about, right, as practitioners or folks who do psychotherapy research, right, there's tons of meta-analysis that has talked about what's effective to, what is an effective therapist, right, or effective therapy. And if we're kind of thinking about what the research suggests, what is effective therapy when we are addressing racial trauma, some of us could go and say, we could use the common factors theory, right? So provide a flexible etiology of the client's distress, create a treatment plan that's going to be connected to our thinking about the case, being aware of the client's demographic, not avoiding challenging topics in therapy, being aware of what's going on with us as the provider, and lastly, the good old therapeutic alliance. However, right? If we're going to tell the truth, right? Healing through truth telling, which is the title of my brief talk. My question is, where is racism in this body of work? How is racism addressed in this body of work? And again, if we're going to keep it 100, it's not there. So some ways to take racial trauma seriously, we are practitioners, researchers in the area who really want to take racial trauma seriously, then we really need to build on this important body of work and really center how the role of racism in people's lives, right? So what my colleagues and I have suggested is that we need to provide an ecological, valid understanding of the client's distress. And when we do this, this requires us to consider racism and other experiences that stem from living in a white supremacy culture. We need to then create treatment plans that are going to be congruent with that ecological valid ideology. We need to assess our clients' racial identity, not just be aware of their demographic, right? And also really kind of think about, if at all, if any aspects of the clients, have they internalized any aspects of white supremacy culture? We need to embrace difficult and challenging content around racism and white supremacy culture. We need to be aware of our own internalization as practitioners of white supremacy culture and how it may be reenacted in the therapeutic process. And not just say the therapeutic alliance, but actually create treatment approaches or healing approaches that address racism-related stress and trauma. Here are some frameworks that do this. These are some healing approaches that really center the impact of racism on people's experiences and for them to heal from that. We have HEART, we have keeping radical healing in mind. We also recently published in the American Psychologist, The Ethics of Decoloniality and Therapy. And we also have a really good one from our colleagues, Dr. Miriam Jernigan and her colleagues. They have an excellent racism recovery plan. So the work is out there, right? Work by folks who have been doing thinking about this for quite some time, and are not colluding with the myths that I outlined earlier on. And in closing, I want us to kind of think about, how do we navigate all of this, right, with ourselves, especially those of us who are folks of color. How do we keep hope alive? And one way is to think about radical hope. And for me, radical hope is hard. I think if we're honest, radical hope is hard. But because it's hard, that's why it matters. Radical hope is not passive. It's an active and intentional choice. It takes effort, it takes heart, it takes you, it takes me, it takes us, it takes courage, it takes courage, it takes courage, especially in hard times. And still, we choose radical hope. Not because it's easy, but because it collectively carries us forward. Thank you so much. And here are some of my books, and now you have an understanding of my framework that I bring to whether I'm talking about neuro, ethics, etc. So thank you so much.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I'm deeply excited to follow this one up. I want to begin by apologizing. I unfortunately am going to be somewhat time limited today, but I appreciate how deep Dr. Hector went in articulating so many of the foundations that we need to hold true to and move through in this moment. And so what he named, I heard him name, was the importance of history, the importance of being unashamed and proud of our politics, and moving with direction because there are other ways of showing up. Right? We should be clear about that. And so, what I want to add to this conversation is born from some work that my name is Dr. Evan August. There was a bit of an introduction at the beginning. I do my work through what's called Black Liberation Psychology, and I want to show you all a bit of what that looks like and how that answers the challenges that we're currently facing right now. And so I want to begin with some of the scholars, some of the ancestors that we don't always get to shine a spotlight on in this moment. So this is Dr. Amos Wilson. Dr. Amos Wilson says, a part of fantasy is to believe in fairy tales. And one of the standard endings of fairy tales is, and they lived happily ever after. There's a part of this assimilationist fantasy that once we integrate with white folk, once we go to school with them, break down the barriers to employment, we would live happily ever after. Yet history does not justify this belief at all. As I've said on many occasions, people progress in history, but they also regress. All of this happens in history. People may integrate in history, but they also disintegrate. Black Americans, people believe in the American idea of progress, that things necessarily get better. Who told you that lie? What we have here as an offering from ancestor, a Black liberation psychologist, Dr. Amos Wilson, is a reminder that our historical traditions, our radical traditions, demonstrate that this process has always been one of warfare. Every piece of love, every piece of care, every piece of life has been one that we've had to fight for, especially in the context, right, of Western imperialism. And so, what I want to ground us in is some of the concepts and constructs that have helped us see the material conditions that we're fighting. Right? As an example, we know in response to the largest mass mobilization of Black people for police reform and abolition in the nation's history, police budgets, in fact, ballooned. In the modern day, we've had major associations of medicine, psychology, and psychiatry admit to near genocidal harm against the bodies and minds of Black and other peoples. We know that as a matter of practice, this has been demonstrated by one of my colleagues, a political scientist at Howard. Black political will is either strategically dismissed or intentionally attacked. When we look at the severe rate of political incarceration that we've seen over the last several decades, to maintain what Sharice Burden-Stelly calls the strategic location of Blackness. Right? There's a psychological, economic, right, force that operates to maintain. I don't say operate as if it's autonomous, right? There's systems and people in place that want the current social structure to remain what it is. And as a fact, right, as a result of these forces, we know that currently Black Americans represent about 9% of the global prison population. We often talk about mass incarceration in the context of the United States. Right? When we talk about fascism, we don't always speak about the fact that, right, African American people specifically represent about 9% of the global prison population. And so to anchor in what this reality is, we get Harold Cruz, Kwame Ture describe these material and psychological conditions of Black people in the United States as that of an internal colony. Kwame Ture then goes and expands this through an idea of intercommunalism. And so these ideas, I think sometimes when we talk about the nuances and the specificities of the way that specific groups, right, experience structural harm, we think, oh, we're blocking out other people. It might be a form of, right, Olympics. But what we see here from, right, former Black Panther ancestor Kwame Ture is that no, it allows us to enter into more firm solidarities with distinct people when we can understand all the mechanics of what is going on. And so I want to note here, as we're thinking about our profession, our traditions, the way that we do our work, is the danger of incomplete apologies. When we frame, as I argue and some of my colleagues argue, the APA apology for dead harm, What was missing from it? Right? Was it a narrative of progress? And as Dr. Amos Wilson discussed, what are the dangers of a narrative of progress? How does it soften us to the warfare that is currently going on? Right? How does it leave us maybe not as equipped as needed for what we're experiencing right now, right, which is a clear expansion of fascism as we see worldwide, several genocides in operation, as well as several distinct ethnic cleansings. And so I want to push forth a distinct paradigm. This is Dr. Asa Hilliard, another ancestor of African-centered psychology. He says, let me pause to make a clear distinction between simple escape or simple freedom and marronage. Simple escape and simple freedom were liberty without aim. Maroonage, on the other hand, was the freedom for the purpose of survival and cultural continuity. We must also take note of the fact that not all slaves became maroons or even aspired to do so. Some chose to rather make the best of the slave system. So what Dr. Asa Hilliard is referencing here is the distinct ways people, enslaved people, responded to oppression. Right? You have some people who tried to move up within that specific institution. There's some people who tried to be more caring, right, as overseers. There's some people who fled, right? They fled with no purpose, no aim. They just fled. What he's speaking to right here is the strategic, consistent political maneuver of not just fleeing, but fleeing with purpose, fleeing from a place of creation. This was a strategy that was used throughout the Americas by several enslaved Africans as well as indigenous peoples to create other forms of community. And so rooting this within psychology, I want us to then think about how do we get distinct frames of this work that we're doing, right? I might have said briefly in the beginning, I do my work through clinical forensic psychology. I understand myself as a Black psychologist. And to this end, I want to distinguish, right, some of the drink my water, some of the distinctions here that people might not be as aware of. Forensic psychology is a subdiscipline concerned with the application of psychological concepts, skills, and research to the law. It was formalized actually in 1968, right? Some of the foundational scholars it looks to are Hugo Munsterberg, Harold Burt, Thomas Grisso, and is rooted in optimizing American criminological theories of justice. That is what forensic psychology is rooted in. Conversely, Black psychology, according to Kapono Retele out of South Africa, Black psychology is a reawakening, a road towards emancipation, a project that encompasses emotional, cognitive, cultural, political, and economic attitudes and practices. Interestingly enough, also formalized in 1968. Right? This is going on at the same conference, while some lawyers in the back room are discussing how to optimize American criminological theories of justice. You get a number of Black psychologists who stormed the stage to demand a better practice for Black people. Some of our foundational scholars are Naeem Akbar, Wade Nobles, Lyndon James Myers, Asa Hilliard, and is rooted in distinct conceptions of Bantu Congo thought, Kemetic wisdom traditions, and Black liberatory politics, right? Distinct forms of indigenous ways of understanding the mind, as well as a more radical approach to, right, our politics. Within this branch of Black psychology, there's also distinct schools. So we have the traditional school. I'm gonna move through this semi-quickly because I want us to get to the radical school. The traditional school, you might say, oh, I know a Kenneth Clark, I know an Alvin Poussin, right? The traditional school is seen as being those Black psychologists who understand that psychology is racist and attempt to, right, operate within the traditional practice to the best of their ability. The strategy here is uplift suasion. Through my greatness in this field, things might get better. We get the reformist branch. And I want to note some people think about reformist as if it is somehow less politically responsible, and that is not the case. Right? We're talking about different strategies. The reformist branch sees psychology as something worth engaging in, something worth salvaging if we add our additional, right, interventions to the game. So we look at William Cross, for instance. We look at a Joseph White, people who have contributed pioneering developmental concepts to the field of psychology. But then we look at the radical branch, right? The radical branch recognizes the urgency of co-creating novel psychological paradigms to respond to the diverse eco, psycho, spiritual needs of African, Black, and other populations made vulnerable. And so in this lane, we have Lenny James Myers, Wade Nobles, right? What does our practice look like when we center this indigenous wisdom? And so for today, I want us to lock in on how we can use some of this indigenous wisdom, some of this justice in response to our particular political context. Very briefly, actually, I will actually own this. Because I unfortunately have a hard stop, I'm not going to dive into this specific ethical point. But if you have questions, I will be responsive either by email or social media to dive into some of the distinct ethical roots of these paradigms. So, in elevating our history, I want to look at a little known Black forensic psychologist named Thomas Hilliard. He said, since the formation of the Association of Black Psychologists in San Francisco, California, in September 1968, a key concern of Black psychologists has been to increase the relevance of psychology and to politicize Black psychology. While the activities and involvements of Black psychologists have taken many forms and directions, a significant area of functioning has been in relationship to the legal system. And so what we see here is a paradigm that is immediately shaping by recognizing the oppressive political context that we're in, right? It's not trying to reform it. It is fully recognizing the harm of the current system. From this, we get our idea of maroon psychology. Psychology has a lot of distinct paradigms. What maroon psychology does is recognize specifically those ancestral wisdoms of those communities throughout the Americas, whether they be in Haiti, whether they be Gullah Geechee, whether they be in Jamaica. Right? These are among the first people to harness their African traditions to recreate superstructures and radical rejection of Western colonialism, land dispossession, and enslavement. I say this because we're talking about very distinct economic relationships, labor relationships, spiritual relationships, family-based relationships. And so a maroon psychological practice leverages this tradition with the explicit purpose of liberation and co-creation. Right? It is very clear our duty is not to the profession, our duty is to our people who are in caves, who are locked up, who are under attack. I argue that the political positioning of forensic psychology, right, a particular branch of psychology that has an ability to shape legal outcomes, is a particularly relevant place to use, right, to use this paradigm, to use this approach. And it is grounded in three central concepts. These concepts grounded in the practice of several radical Black psychologists and healers. These concepts are wild seed justice, the legal jailbreak, and collective Black consciousness. Wild seed justice is this idea that we need to sketch new worlds for us to grow into. It is a call to imagine and create sustainable gardens with abundant, changing, growing pathways to freedom so that we can have beauty and justice as a standard instead of continuing to loop into repressive colonial thought and systems of crime, punishment, deterrence, and rehabilitation. Wild seed justice is a call to reclaim and rebirth justice beyond the shadows, traps, and white power delusions of colonialism. To be clear, this is fundamentally an abolitionist concept emerging from the Afrofuturist work of Octavia Butler. And so when we think about how we're engaging with our field, how we're engaging our people, right, it's making sure that we uplift community safety, thriving, and truth rather than punishment, coercion, and violence. I have a lot of colleagues who say, all of I want to be more political, but we already have these systems. We already have this conception of justice. And it's important to remind them that there are a lot of distinct, well articulated ideas and theories of justice. And I argue for our current moment, this idea of wild seed justice that emerged from some of our luminaries and our indigenous thinkers is an essential one. People then ask, how do I relate? I'm currently I'm working in a prison, I'm working in a hospital, I'm working in a cultural context. how am I supposed to do my work? And so from here, we pull the concept of the legal jailbreak. In that small ancient room, the objects of law destabilized the state's monopoly over the legitimate use of violence and exerted power over and through the agents of law. This comes from the book Tip of the Spear, where he's recounting the way that radical lawyers and imprisoned revolutionaries saw legal proceedings, the state, these institutions as not as authentic places of justice, but they saw their work as opportunities to delegitimize their control on legal equity, their control over the ideas of justice. Right? The idea of the legal jailbreak maintains a clear view of the state as a fundamentally unjust place for Black, I would argue, as well as many indigenous peoples, internal and external to the US borders. And finally, in terms of our relation to one another, our relation to ethic, my colleagues and I recently published an article called Grounded, an Emerging Theory of Collective Black Consciousness. Collective Black consciousness is a living synergy of ways of thinking, knowing, feeling, and being that's oriented toward the collective actualization and liberation of Black communities. Collective Black consciousness is love in practice that is shaped by a transcendence of geography and time to access and create all these things together. What you get is a specific practice that is designed to create liberation in our time. This is a psychological practice that liberates the minds, bodies, and spirits of Black peoples, grounded in a clear view of the anti-Black political apparatus of the state. And so all these ideas, what does this look like in practice? I'm saying a lot to you. What I want to know, and I appreciate again that Hector brought this up, because we need to expand our ideas of history. A lot of what I told you, I did not get from sitting and thinking. I got from reading stories, reading testimonies, talking to elders about how did y'all act when you were experiencing this form of oppression. And so one case example I want to bring up is that of Thomas Hilliard in the case of Angela Davis. A lot of people are familiar with Angela Davis. Not as many people are familiar with the Black psychologists that were crucial to her achieving freedom. Angela Davis, who worked in concert with the Soledad brothers as there was an active material fight for freedom, right, in California. The Soledad brothers were people who understood themselves as soldiers fighting against the United States terror regime in an era of COINTELPRO. They incarcerate Angela Davis, right? They have her as political enemy, terrorist threat number one. And what Thomas Hilliard does with a clear view of how the state is going to try to put on a sham of a trial, collaborates with her lawyers to invent new psychological practices to assess her view of communism, her idea of feminism, her ideas of Black identity, and then put that against the jurors that they're getting ready to select. Right? They consult with the lawyer, what's called the voir dire process, to make sure that even though they moved the trial to a predominantly white conservative district, they created this avenue, this stream, this in some ways an underground railroad that allowed for justice to be the ultimate outcome of that trial. Right? As many of us know, Angela Davis was freed and not incarcerated. Another case example I want to bring forth, N.C. Magnani. N.C. Magnani, you'll see his photo to the right, was a Black psychologist operating during the height of apartheid South Africa. He's one of the first Black clinical and forensic psychologists of that period. And at the time, began to create his own assessment and clinical practice, where he noted all the distinct structural harms and violences that apartheid was doing to South African people. When he was called, I'll say this actually, at the time, a lot of freedom fighters, people who were materially fighting for the freedom and the end to apartheid through violent and nonviolent means, but again, through violent means, because apartheid was a violent process. N.C. Magnani was called to offer testimony to demonstrate what are the psychological conditions of these people to mitigate what the courts wanted, which was a death sentence for any and all freedom fighters. N.C. Magnani, in his practice, politicized psychology to demonstrate the humanity and the clear justice that these freedom fighters were arguing for. In his book, this is the last case that he recounts, and he discusses how, despite this, one of the cases that he actually lost, and he remembers watching McBride, a freedom fighter who had bombed an apartheid facility, uh, move to the courtroom and thinking this was the last time that he would see him. And approximately a year later, the People's Popular Resistance won, and it brought down apartheid. So what Thomas Hilliard and what Mangiani teach us is that while as psychologists we can continue to refine our methods, continue to refine our oppression, it is very clear that justice, the ones that we're arguing for, that we're advocating for, do not come by, again, refining our psychological practice. They come by us being embedded within grassroots and political movement. Ultimately, the type of justice that we are seeking comes from below, not from above. It is through popular resistance, like we're seeing right now in Minnesota, that justice occurs. And so, unfortunately, I said this before, I have to hop out. I don't have time for questions. I want to name that this is a book that we actually recently released last year, uh, recounting many of these histories. What's going on, Krista? Recounting many of these histories, as well as strategies for how to incorporate this into your day-to-day practice. If you want to follow up, that is me on Instagram. That is my email. I'm excited. I've actually never got the chance to talk with Chris. Chris, it's good to see you. We got to connect at some point. And thank you all
Absolutely.
for your time.
It's good to see you too. Take care. All right, so I am going to go ahead and share my screen right now. Wow, I can't believe I'm going after two phenomenal presentations. There's no pressure here, I hope. But I have so much gratitude for being in this space, and I want to again thank the organizers of this event for providing me an opportunity to talk to everyone in this webinar. I know it's a great turnout. I know that we're ending shortly, so I will try to stick to the time as best as I can. So today I'm just talking a bit about addressing and healing racial trauma, which is in alignment with the last two presentations that we just heard. A little bit about me. My name is Dr. Krista Edwards. I have a PhD in school psychology. I'm also the co-founder of the Black School Psychologists Network. As stated earlier, my research interests are in race-related stress and intersectionality among Black youth. So really looking at a strength-based approach. I'm also interested in caregiver practices in response to racism and culturally responsive instruction in the classroom. But before I get started, I always want to just take a moment to acknowledge the land that we are on. So right now I'm currently on unceded, stolen territory of the Kickapoo, Jamano, Tawakoni, and Wichita people. I want to thank the First Peoples for their continued protection, cultivation, and nourishment, and sustaining, and the lessons they have taught us of taking care of this land. As I go on to discuss the intersection between oppression and care, it's important to acknowledge the role that the land plays in our healing. I also want to note to the right, you'll see on my page that the UN, which many of us do not know, but the United Nations actually declared this last decade from 2015 to 2024 the decade for the people of African descent. And unfortunately, I was also one of those people that was not made aware of this until 2024, when it was supposed to conclude. And so we're in a moment now where human rights activists have urged to extend it another 10 years to allow for more time to honor and advance the rights of Black communities globally. But I say this because the reality is that Black liberation and advancement can't happen without Indigenous liberation and advancement. And it reminds me of Angela Davis, her statement of justice is indivisible. And so you can't decide who gets civil rights and who doesn't, which is why every single person here on this call and just globally has to reckon with the history of Indigenous peoples around the world. I also want to extend an ancestral acknowledgement, which recognizes the indigeneity within a global context and the impacts of colonization and destabilizing Africa. Black people take up space on Turtle Island because of forced displacement resulting from the transatlantic slave trade and the colonization of Africa by Europeans. And as a Black person, I'm reminded of the many ways colonialism, imperialism, and racism continue to impact the well-being of Black and Indigenous people. And so I'm also reminded that healing, learning, and understanding across and within the Black and Indigenous communities is what's critical to moving us forward towards a future of reconciliation. So in my presentation today, I will just talk a bit about, extend a bit more on racial trauma, the foundations of it, looking a little bit into theory. And I'm also addressing how you might use in clinical practice the DSM to include those racial traumatic experiences. And then I'll end talking about some of the culturally responsive treatment modalities as well. So before I get started, I always like to set the conditions for learning, because not only can these conversations be very activating, but they can be difficult for folks who are just not well versed in having these conversations. And so I draw from Singleton's beginning courageous conversations about race, which is typically used for educators, but we are all educators in one sense or another, right? In this space where we work with clients who come from various backgrounds, and we teach them skills, we walk alongside them, we introduce them to new information to help better the quality of their life. And so there are 4 main points that I really want to hone in on, which are stay engaged, expect to experience some discomfort. Human rights are non-negotiable. And so we're not having a conversation about competing human rights. We are having a conversation that is centered on valuing all of humanity. And at this end of this presentation, you might expect or experience a lack of closure, and that's okay. When I do presentations with youth about the power of language, I often go through the Singleton's courageous conversations about race, because sometimes they leave these conversations and these presentations with a lot of information, but not a lot of clarity. And sometimes that's a good thing when you're fed with a lot of information and it prompts you to ask more questions. And so I also like to bring this graph up this figure, I should say, because anti-Black racism is a specific manifestation of racism rooted in European colonization. And it is a structure of inequities and power, resources, and opportunities that systematically disadvantage people of African descent. And so I like to have this figure because I think it primes our minds to receive information. And so I want folks to take a moment to really look at this figure and reflect on where you are in your process of becoming anti-racist. Are you more so in the growth zone where you, I guess I'll go from the fear zone first. So, sometimes it's a process that you work through and it's not always linear. But folks who might find themselves in the fear zone might be finding themselves avoiding hard questions, striving to be comfortable, and make situations comfortable. So really finding it hard to sit in that discomfort. If you're in the learning zone, you might find yourself seeking out questions that make you feel uncomfortable. You might find yourself trying to educate yourself about race and structural racism as well. And if you're in the growth zone, you might be able to sit fully in that discomfort, right? And you might welcome it. You might speak out, feel comfortable speaking out when you are witnessing injustices or racism in action. And so I like this figure because it really does allow you to reflect on where you are as we go on to engage in the content. All right. So I love this quote because which says, just because we carry it well doesn't mean that it's not heavy. And it's particularly speaks to me because I think as a practitioner, as a Black woman, as someone who is constantly trying to ground themselves in a liberatory framework and just cannot be quiet when I witness injustices, that becomes very heavy. And I think folks might assume that you're just okay, but just because I carry it well doesn't mean it's not heavy. And so that brings me to a situation that I want to open up and I want to highlight and share with you all. So as a school psychologist, I've been in the schools for years at this point in different capacities. And so the next slide, I'm going to share a text message from one of my former students about his experience in school. And I think this sets the tone nicely for what we go into when we talk about the impact of racism, and particularly with youth, particularly with Black youth. So I'll read this text, and I want everyone to just sort of chew on this as we go through the rest of the presentation. And so for this purpose, like, there are no names, but I'm going to use a fake school name. So the text says, "Hi, Miss Krista. This is Johnny. I have 2 weeks left in my junior year, and I've never felt so bad in my life. I'm failing 2 classes because I'm uncomfortable being in them thanks to the teachers of those classes. I know that I want to be a teacher. I love school, and I want to teach others. I really dislike Williamson High School. It's mostly white students, and even though I'm half white, I'm not seen as a white student in the school. In most of my classes, I'm the only person of color, and when we do group activities, I feel left out. Yes, I tried to help, but my opinions get dismissed. My mom moved to the South Side in hopes that me and my sister would get a better education at Williamson High School, just for me to feel alone. I don't fit in with the majority of students here. I've started to think about why I've been so depressed since my freshman year of high school. It's the school. Every single day I've stepped into this school, I've faced some sort of form of racism, whether it be in the form of jokes, in the bathroom walls, in the sports I participate in, or in the classroom. This school makes me feel so terrible. I wasn't raised around white people growing up like the rest of the people of color at Williamson High School were. I'm not used to this culture, and I'll never be used to it. It's not for me. I want to graduate, but I'm starting to question on if it's worth going through another year of this or not. I don't know if I can take it. I'm really lost right now, and being at this school makes it worse. I never thought that being a Black student at Williamson High School would make me feel this way. It shouldn't make me feel this way, but I feel like I'm suffocating whenever I'm here. Like, I don't know. It's just a hard feeling to describe, and it's one that I'm not used to feeling. Being here has given me insecurities I've never thought I had before. I really hope you can prove some insight, and thank you." This was a text message I received about 2 to 3 years ago. I can't remember now. But when I did receive this text message, my heart shattered. And it's still even hard for me to read this, because this is a common experience for a lot of our students in school. And this is unacceptable and should never be the case, especially where this is supposed to be one of the safest places for kids to be. They spend 8+ hours a day in this place. Quite frankly, they're here more than they're at home. And children should not be feeling like this. And if you are feeling like this, and folks who are on this call, we all have a fundamental understanding of safety and how important that is. And when one is not feeling safe, you are not ready to learn. And that opens up a whole host of other issues that this child is more susceptible to down the road. And so I think we all know, like I've mentioned, and there's a pretty decent understanding of the impact of racism and mental health here, but it is a public health crisis. And as of 2024, over at least 75% of Black Americans have reported experiencing racism. It is also known that experiences of racism are compounded or exacerbated when Black people are likely to identify with the following. So when they're likely to be a part of the queer community, when they are likely to have higher levels of education, being older, needing social support, having high social well-being, and then being educated at various institutions. So one thing that I think is really important to sort of go over is the levels of racism. So one thing, we think about racism as this, like, we understand what it is, but we don't really go into how it shows up, right? And so it shows up structurally, where there is an established hierarchy of groups based on perception of race, right? And we see that when we look at when we look even back to the transatlantic slave trade, right? And so then we also see it interpersonally, where the beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors of individuals are based on biases, stereotypes, and even prejudice. We also see it in a systemic and institutional way, where we're looking at policies, practices, and programs within systems. And then we also sometimes forget this last one, which is internalized racism, which it lies within the individuals, where folks have absorbed that cultural racist ideas of the racial hierarchy and accepted the inequities as normal. And this is something that, if you are not necessarily well-versed, and we'll get into what the therapeutic relationship looks like later, this is something that might need to be unpacked in therapy. And so moving on, and in short, everyday racism produces systemic racism, while systemic racism simultaneously shapes the spaces of everyday racism, and also the outcome of just cumulative patterns of everyday racism. So we are looking at people who are experiencing racism from all of these different levels. And so no wonder when we talk later on about how there are some similar symptoms to PTSD, this is how and why it could show up, right? We're talking about people who no longer want to go into their job place, who walk outside, and as soon as they see police officers, they're having an adverse reaction. So these are all different systems where they're experiencing these symptoms. So one thing that's also important, and part of this presentation, is looking at microaggressions as a form of racism as well. And so that is something that, although folks think, microaggressions are small, the name is not microaggressions to indicate that they are any less impactful. And so I don't want to take away from the folks who have coined this term, but microaggressions are those everyday, verbal or nonverbal, environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether they're intentional or unintentional, and they communicate a hostile, derogatory, or negative message to target someone based on their marginalized group identity.
Where is the love? Where is the love? Where is the love?
Great day, everyone. This is Bishop Bonnie L. Radden, and you are listening to Inside Out, a weekly broadcast about our mental and emotional well-being.
You're more than conquerors because you believe me.
Believe in yourself. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself. Believe in me. Know that I am. Folks always got something to say. Love to criticize you in every way. Instead of taking what's wrong out of their own eyes, they'd rather whisper and make fun than deny. Believe in yourself. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself. Believe her. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself. Believe her. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself. Believe her. Believe in me. Know that I am.
This song is all about belief and believing in oneself. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself, for you are a new creature God created.
They spread little rumors, tell lies, little foxes destroy the vine. You feel so shaked up, you wanna wake up, so stay on your knees. I'm begging you, please forgive your enemies. What's down in the dark will see the light. It will be alright. Believe in me. Believe in yourself. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in yourself. Believe in me. Know that I am for you. Believe in me. Yeah. that I am for you and me. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, believe in me.
There's a new beat in town. Welcome to Bullet and Flight Music Store, your premier spot for music, books, and one-of-a-kind novelties. Looking to treat yourself or find a unique gift for the music lover in your life? We make it easy. In fact, you can start your collection today for as low as 44 cents. That's right, world-class finds for less than a cup of coffee. Visit us online at bulletinflightmusic.myshopify.com. Plus, keep the conversation going 24/7 with Bullet in Flight Radio on Podbean. Bullet in Flight. Find your rhythm, find your soul.
Bullet in flight, fly, bullet in flight.